Welcome back, everyone, to today's Explainer. We're diving right into a 200-level history topic that's literally the bedrock of human civilization, world economic systems. Now, I want you to think of these systems as way more than just exchanging goods or tracking money. They're actually the fundamental scaffolding of political power and national sovereignty. So here's a massive question for us to tackle today. How exactly do economic systems shape global power? Because, as history students, you already get that dates and battles, they really only tell half the story. If we truly want to understand the why behind the what of global history, we've got to decode the underlying economic frameworks. These are the rule books nations use to survive, compete, and project their influence on the world stage. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with scarcity and flow. Then we'll look at trade and African communalism. After that, it's markets versus socialist planning, followed by Bretton Woods and global finance. Then we'll hit the pivotal Nixon shock era, and finally wrap up with globalization, technology, and inequality. Let's jump right in. Section 1. Scarcity and flow, the economic problem. Before we can even begin to analyze grand empires, we really need to look at the basic survival mechanics of human societies. At the absolute core of our entire study is what we call the economic problem. It's that fundamental, unavoidable conflict between infinite human wants and finite, limited resources. Think about it, right? If land, food, and capital were just infinite, there'd be absolutely no need for governments, or armies, or international diplomacy. Scarcity is the ultimate driver of all political power. It inherently forces us to create organized systems just to allocate those limited resources. And that takes us right into the circular flow model. Let's use a real-world example, like a local bakery. Households provide the labor, the people actually baking the bread and running the shop. In return, the bakery provides those workers with wages. Then those exact same workers take their wages and buy groceries or clothes from other businesses, which generates revenue for those firms to keep the whole cycle spinning. It's essentially the continuous, uninterrupted heartbeat of a nation's internal economy. Moving on to Section 2, Trade and African Communalism, Historical Clashes. See, different cultures solved that fundamental problem of scarcity in vastly different ways long before they ever collided on the world stage. Historically, we see a really stark contrast between two major trade paradigms. On one side, you have mercantilism. This is that old imperial zero-sum mindset, where the entire focus is just hoarding gold and extracting resources from your competitors. But then on the other side, we have comparative advantage, a theory introduced by David Ricardo way back in 1817. He argued that nations should produce goods where they have a lower opportunity cost, which actually allows for mutual benefit. This was a total game changer. This shift from just hoarding wealth to specialized exchange literally became the bedrock of modern global free trade. But as historians, it's absolutely vital to recognize that Western capitalism was definitely not the only default setting. Let's look at the indigenous African communalism philosophy of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is this profound belief that an individual's prosperity is inextricably linked to the prosperity of their community. Unlike capitalist systems that prioritize individual wealth accumulation, this framework placed the ultimate priority on social cohesion, shared labor, and collective well-being. This communal system was built heavily on reciprocity and communal land tenure, which was held in trust by elders rather than just sold off as a commodity. Now, during the colonial era, European powers severely disrupted these systems. They pushed through land acts specifically designed to displace communal owners and force indigenous populations into labor pools. But here's the incredibly fascinating part. Despite that massive historical disruption, the resilience of these structures is just amazing. Today, they still survive and actually thrive in massive informal networks. You see it in the bustling markets of Lagos and the Ego Imu Ahea apprenticeship system, where it's communal trust and mentorship, not formal bank contracts, that actually drive economic survival. All right, Section 3, Markets versus Socialist Planning, the Ideological Divide. Let's objectively unpack the mechanics of the competing systems that practically defined the entire 20th century. These systems present us with a fundamental architectural trade-off. Market economies rely on decentralized price signals. This yields really high efficiency, but it often results in low equity, meaning you get massive wealth disparities. Conversely, you have command or planned economies, which rely on centralized state direction. Historically, these aimed for high equity by trying to ensure everyone's basic needs were met, but they often suffered from lower efficiency and severe product shortages. Then you have mixed economies, which is what most nations use today, attempting to strike a moderate, redistributive balance. It's these inherent trade-offs between efficiency and equity that essentially fueled the geopolitical struggles of the whole Cold War era. Looking closely at their foundational philosophies, we're contrasting Adam Smith's invisible hand of the free market, where decentralized individual self-interest unintentionally drives societal innovation, against Karl Marx's vision of socialist planning, where the state controls the means of production specifically to prevent worker exploitation. Historically speaking, free markets were incredibly good at rapid adaptation. Central planning, on the other hand, constantly struggled with massive information gaps. Just imagine the sheer literal impossibility of a central committee in the Soviet Union trying to manually set the price and production quotas for millions of everyday items, from shoes to steel. It almost inevitably led to those infamous, widespread shortages. Section 4. Bretton Woods and Global Finance, the Modern Architecture. Now we're going to explore how the victors of World War II attempted to build a unified, stable, global economy right from the top down. Let's track this rapid 50-year transformation. Back in 1944, the Bretton Woods Conference established the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Just 3 years later, in 1947, GATT was signed to lower global trade barriers. We are going to touch on the 1971 Nixon shock in just a second, but I want you to notice how this entire era culminates in 1995 with the formation of the World Trade Organization. In a remarkably short historical window, national sovereignty became more and more bound by these international financial institutions, which permanently shifted how global power was actually exercised. To really understand the friction of this era, we need to compare the IMF's objectives with those of historical socialist planning models. So the IMF acts as a global lender of last resort. They offer conditional loans designed to tightly integrate nations and maintain currency stability. But in stark contrast, socialist models like those in the Soviet Union or Yugoslavia prioritized internal state resource allocation. Their entire goal was self-reliance and intentional isolation. They wanted to be completely shielded from the volatile shocks and inflation of the Western capitalist markets. Which brings us to Section 5, the Nixon shock era, floating sovereignty. Because, as we know, even the most carefully constructed architectures eventually hit their breaking points. In August 1971, the United States was facing rising domestic inflation and trade deficits. So they unilaterally ended the US dollar's convertibility to gold. This abrupt move ushered in the modern era of floating exchange rates. It was a singular event that completely severed the global monetary system from physical gold, and it essentially rewrote the rules of international leverage practically overnight. And the ripple effects on the global south were absolutely severe. Developing nations suddenly found their currencies completely subjected to the intense, unpredictable volatility of international markets. The cost just to service their external debts fluctuated wildly based on Western interest rates. This triggered a massive loss of national economic planning autonomy. Imagine being a newly independent nation, and suddenly your domestic social spending is being dictated by currency shifts on Wall Street. It forced an increased and often really painful reliance on IMF conditional loans and shock therapy just to keep their heads above water. Section 6. Globalization, Technology, and Inequality, the Contemporary Crisis. Let's bring this into the present and analyze the current state of our highly interconnected, mixed economies. Looking at the positives first, the sheer scale of modern economic growth over the last century has been staggering. Truly unprecedented. This explosive growth has been driven by our integration into global trade networks and rapid paradigm-shifting advancements in technology and the internet. Plus, you have huge demographic catalysts like the post-war baby boom and the massively increased vital participation of women in the global workforce. All of this has dramatically expanded the productive capacity and the overall GDP of nations around the globe. However, as history students, we've got to objectively observe the cracks in our current systems too. While mixed market economies have generated immense total wealth, rising income inequality and extreme wealth concentration present a profoundly destabilizing threat. When wealth concentrates too heavily at the top, it can start to fray the political and social fabric of a society. This rising inequality actively challenges the very stability and national sovereignty that these modern economic frameworks were historically designed to protect in the first place. Which leaves us with one final critical question. Based on all the historical precedents we've explored today, can modern mixed economies successfully reform to balance global growth with the rising threat of inequality? Or are we currently standing on the brink of an entirely new economic paradigm? I'll leave you to ponder the heavy historical weight of our modern economic policies. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I can't wait to explore more fascinating frameworks with you in the next explainer.